in so many different ways. So I'm really happy to, and a number of people are participating also on WebEx today, or Zoom, or whatever we're using these days. And, we always try to keep Case Club really interactive. By the way, I'm Stacey Holland, I'm Director for Research Operations and Faculty from Pediatrics. We really want Case Club to be interactive. Today, what we wanted to do is bring you a group of really strong technical expertise and describe what it looks like to work with a biostatistician in a highly functional relationship, and maybe also give some examples of maybe when things didn't go so well, so we can avoid those pitfalls as a group. So I think there is a way for that. I know there's a number of people, as I said, who are participating via WebEx. If you have questions, Barbara, is there a way for them to direct your questions? Okay, just write them in, and Barbara will make sure that you get some screen time. But we have today a talk full of a number of questions already posed to the group that they're prepared to answer, so hopefully your questions will be answered. Before we go on to today's talk, I have a couple of housekeeping things. Number one, the ever-important survey. As you all know, Case Club is new, and we rely on your feedback and letting us know what you like about today, what you'd like to see in the future, what topics should we present again, or maybe topics we've never presented. And so please respond to the survey, and if you put your name in, you'll be in the running to win an exclusive Case Club mug. We're down to 11. So these are about to go on the last one, so get yours today. So you want to draw our names of people who responded to the survey last month? Oh, this is yay! City. There you go. Be careful about it. Now we have 10. All right. Next thing, couple of other things. Oh, December Case Club. You have asked, and we are responding. Many people say we would love to talk to a program officer. So we have a grant official from NIAID named Ann Namcom coming on December 17th. Cindy Hagan from Center for AIDS Research thinks that she is just fabulous. She can tell us everything about grant submissions or grant reviews or grant funding, kind of behind the scenes look. Because she is going to be here anyway, we're shifting Case Club to this December 17th date at 3 p.m. Highly unconventional. We are across the street at Winchester, so we'll send out the date soon for that. So mark your calendars now. A couple of other quick things are Case Club specials. Just want to mention the Georgia CPSA Sales 2 and the Emory Building Interdisciplinary Research for Women's Health. These are institutional pay awards, and the deadlines are coming up in March. So I'm thinking a number of people, these are kind of like pre-K, so pre-K 23, a number of people may be interested in applying for these. So now, we're going to get to the topic at hand. And I think that the biostatistics imperative is directly tied to this enhancing reproducibility through rigor and transparency that NIH rolled out a couple of years ago. I mean, this has always been a part of science, right? But they really elevated it. There was a number of really high-profile publications regarding the lack of transparency, the lack of rigor, and the lack, thereby, of reproducibility. And biostatistics is such a cornerstone of making this right and getting back to basics. And so I really want to frame today's panel discussion around this enhancing reproducibility through rigor and transparency. Just a couple of things that I'm going to go over, so we're kind of starting on a level playing field, and to provide a framework for the Q&A that we'll launch into after this. Statisticians, I'm sure if you've ever worked with them, you'll agree, it's a high value proposition. Statisticians can help with that rigor and reproducibility and enhance transparency. There's key members of the research team. When you are applying for your grants, they should be in your budget. They can identify common statistical issues, play valuable roles before you submit your grant. Really think like a reviewer and highlight and point out where you might not have that rigor that will be a kiss of death in your grant application. And I don't know, they probably serve as interesting and entertaining dinner companions as they found out all kinds of useful statistics about what you're eating and who can spell collection and that sort of thing. Is this true, by the way? Yeah? Yeah.
my sister-in-law's a statistician and my father's a statistician, so that is our dinner table.
That is your dinner table, okay. Invite us, please. This is just a couple of things from this Center for Scientific Review website. They were talking about rigor and transparency, really highlighting the key role of statisticians. A couple of statisticians from UC Davis and University of North Carolina, or a college in North Carolina, a couple of quotes from them about what they think that what they know they can provide. Statisticians bring clarity and focus and specificity to a project. You may have a research idea, but how does that come to light? How does that become testable? They're operationalizing, I love this, the scientific methods when investigators introduce that hypothesis, and the statistician turns it into a testable hypothesis. They can help applicants quantify what they know, but more importantly, or as important, quantify what they don't know, and what is the uncertainty involved, and that's what really makes the scientific research. So today is not about all the statistical resources available to you on campus. There are a lot, though, I just want to tell you. We don't have our panel is leaders from a number of these courses, but not all of them, and I actually just learned that my diagram is, I did say it's not necessarily inclusive, and already one of the panelists said you're missing birds, so we have a panel with 2 birds here. But this is, the pink is the wind ship. The Biostatistician Consulting Center is in the green there. Department of Medicine is DAB, and PEAS is in the peach. So there are also other statistical experts around campus and around the Atlantic area, especially when it comes to really highly specialized data analysis, genomics, as well as big data. You can go to our Friends Center to check for big data. Department of Bioinformatics, another key resource. Computational core, which they list, they do a lot of omics type analyses. And the Center for Computational and Quantitative Genetics and Human Genetics, Mike Epstein runs that center. So you have some of these highly specialized. Today, we're not talking about that, okay? It's just about the biostats core is what we're talking about. This is the key focus of today, kind of what I hear Courtney sometimes call the bread and butter. Now, of course, there's a lot more specializations than just that, but this is what for today is the focus of today's topic. So we have our panelists. In the interest of time, I won't tell you a whole lot about each of them. But to say that they are leaders in their field, representing multiple cores on campus, and I don't know, I actually didn't add it. Collectively, what do you have, like 300 years experience, something like that? Yeah. So we're really, really pleased today that we have such a high-functioning panel. We've got 2 from the Department of Pediatrics, the Pediatrics core, Courtney McCracken, the Managing Director. On the end, Diana Ross here as well. She represents, I don't know if you in pediatrics know, we have a qualitative core, and so she represents that perspective. Dr. Hansel here, second in, is, or yes, second in from the end. He is here to represent the, what do you represent? The DAB, right? No, not DAB, the bird, thank you. And also, as well as Dr. Lyle. Oh my gosh, I can't even get it. Okay, thank you. We have CFAR, we have bird on the end. Now you're here for DAB.
I'm here for DAB.
DAB, okay. And Renee Moore, Dr. Moore is here from BCC. Okay. So you collectively represent anybody on campus would be able to talk to you after the lunch. Okay, moving right along. So why would you contact the Biostats core? So project start, I think, is really important. You want to talk about project feasibility, get their input into the study design and make efficient use of resources, protocol development and sample size calculations, and determining the optimal format for collecting and extracting data. Middle and end, of course, this is probably where most of you think about using statistics. The optimal format for reporting the data, the robust statistical design to get the most out of your data, and then also creating meaningful figures for presentations and those kinds of things. Finally, I wanted to throw this in here. Not all cores will necessarily do this, but you can talk to a core that maybe serves your community. Database modeling and data management, I mean, that's pretty hardcore stuff that you can find out if there's experts in your core. And if not, I can speak to our pediatric biostats core. If they can't do it, they typically can point you in the right direction, somebody who can help you, validating instruments, randomization schemes, and even sometimes customized lectures on statistical topics. One of my favorites that Courtney and her crew did a number of years ago was That for Rats. A lot of people just do it that way alone. Dr. Waller wanted to talk a little bit about this hot off the presses NIH policy for data management and sharing. Could you use those? Oh, you have it. Okay.
So the NIH is revising its data management and there's a draft guidance out there. I think we'll comment on it now. So we should take a look at it because it feeds into what's required, what will be required. In grant proposals, study sections are going to look for this. They'll give definitions of what they mean by data management data. As NIH or federal funding is tax money going to you, you need to make your data publicly available. There's a bunch of rules about that, different rules that you're probably familiar with. But this policy is also relating to how do I store my data, what am I legally responsible to do with my data when my study ends, and pays for storage over time. They're still trying to work a lot of these things out, but it's a moving target right now. But you need to be well aware of it because it's something that a relatively good scientific idea can be sunk in review if there's no plan for how to store your data or what to do with your data. So this outlines some of the things we're going to be looking for specifically. We're all reading this so that we can keep up with the new rules, but I want to put it out there because it is some of the things we're talking about. It's not like statistics is done, and it's just a fixed set of tools. These kind of targets are moving all the time, and it impacts the fundability of your research.
Thank you, and thank you for staying up to date on it. And I'm assuming you're getting comments as well, pretty much. Now I'm going to turn over just briefly to Dr. McCracken to just give us kind of, again, to level the playing field, to talk about some common issues with statistics in framing and design and execution.
Yeah, so I think,
You need to move it up a little bit.
okay, so I think that these are some common themes that I've seen, both from the peer review process, whether it be for a manuscript or a grant application. The first one's pretty straightforward, a poorly defined hypothesis. I think of this where your hypothesis is maybe too vague or unclear, or you really haven't clearly defined what your outcome measure or your exposure variables might be. For example, you might say, we want to associate, something with something, and it's not really clear what those somethings are. When you talk about incomplete description of data collection, I think this actually goes to what Dr. Waller was just mentioning. What are you collecting, when are you collecting it, where are you collecting it, how are you collecting it, and how is it being stored? Sort of thinking about the who, what, where, why, and when of data collection. I think, again, this is going to be coming to light even more, largely here in the next several months. Dealing with missing data. Every grant application, and particularly paper, should have something about missing data. Missing data can be dealt with statistically in different ways. Some of the methods that we use have strict assumptions for how missing data were dealt with. Certain grant mechanisms actually require you to write out almost an entire paragraph on how you deal with missing data. I think PCORI is one of the big ones that really wants to know what you're going to do. So I think depending on your audience, the funding mechanism, all of that, this section could be a big point for your application. And then obviously power analysis and sample size fails. I mean, every grant application should more or less have some sort of power analysis section. The scrutiny of that is going to be based on, whether or not you're using human subjects or this is purely laboratory based. But this is stuff that, I need 20 per group, 2 sample t-tests, p less than 0.05. Like, that's not necessarily going to cut it. Depending on your review process, some people may want to see, like, what software did you use, and, all these different assumptions. How are you accounting for attrition or missing data in those calculations? And that's something that we can definitely help with. Go to the next slide. And then common problems with data analysis plans, too simple. Again, going back to that, everybody loves the two-sample t-test, like that may not be enough for your application or your paper, or you get too complicated. There's some really cool statistical packages out there nowadays that are using what I like to call black box methods, and those are definitely valid things to use, but you have to know when to use them and how to appropriately describe them. There's also cases where, that method may not be appropriate for your sample size or the type of design that you have. And honestly, I'm a kind of old school in that I don't like to get too complicated if it's not necessary. I kind of abide by the KISS principle to keep it simple, stupid. Only because you have to think about your audience, who's reviewing your paper, who's reviewing your application. Are they going to understand that? Can you describe it? Do you understand it? If you don't, then chances are somebody else isn't. And so you don't kind of always need an atomic bomb to kill a fly. But if you do want to use an atomic bomb, there's definitely ways in which you can do that, and we can help you. And then, kind of on that same line, like not being suitable, there are certain assumptions that kind of go into item 4, that if you've got, dependent structure in your data, repeated measures, people being assessed multiple times over time, or there's some degree of correlation in your data, whether it's, patients are nested within the same hospital system and you're comparing, different healthcare systems or whatever it ends up being, you've got to account for that in your analysis. And so again, these are all things that we're well versed in, that we want to help you with, and that reviewers are going to be, looking at this. So, and that's, what we're here to talk about today.
Thank you, Courtney. I think with that, we'll go ahead, now that we've already sort of talked about some really specific issues, I want to bring it up a level and just open it up to the panel and ask if you guys, if there's somebody on the panel who'd like to tell us about a success story. What were the secret ingredients to developing and maintaining that relationship, and were there any generalizable reasons for that success? Diana?
Okay, we work on the qualitative core, which is work. We analyze interviews and we can do validation of instruments too, but we take the patient's experience. And we worked with Dr. Maui Carmine. She was interested in looking at bone marrow transplant and gene therapy for patients who have hemophilia. We spent a lot of time with her, training her. She's interested in qualitative research, so she wanted to learn the method. So there is a 2-day course here in School of Public Health that can help with learning analysis. We gave her a lot of information to read. We spent a lot of time one-on-one with her, going through analysis, going through how to do interviews. We helped her write the interview. We helped her write the research questions. She came to us early. That's the key. There are different methods of analysis in qualitative research, but you need to know the method up front so you know how to collect the data. Because different methods, such as ethnography, have different ways of collecting the data. So she spent a lot of time with us one-on-one and worked hard with us.
Okay, so really sort of enabling yourself and taking the lead and learning the methodology that you're teaching her.
Yeah.
You were teaching her to fish.
Yes.
Okay, thank you for that example. Any other examples?
She was able to get a Cultivating grant.
Yeah, that's great.
Money is good.
Any other secrets to success? Yeah.
This is kind of a step back, but abstracting any kind of collaborations or relationships. So the key to any relationship is communication and respect. So there's a continuum of getting statistical help from the kind of drop-in emergency department. Help me. Here's a spreadsheet, and then give me the answer. That can get done, but it's not going to be very satisfying. It's not going to be very long-lasting, and it's not going to impress grant reviewers or journal writers. It may need to happen time to time, but we'd like to move from consulting to collaboration. Collaboration is mutually beneficial. So a consultant will often biostatisticians don't like to be treated like technicians. We operate that way sometimes, but we'd rather be part of the research project. We want to learn how it works. We want to take your question from PEDS or from biomedical science and turn it into a data and math question, get a data and math answer, and then retranslate that back. It's not a linear process. It's not always done. That sometimes you get back and the question we've answered with your data is not exactly the question or it's only part of the question. So John Tukey's a famous statistician, has a quote that an approximate answer to the right question is a lot better than a precise answer to the wrong question. So we can give you, we can do a black box method and get a number with, 18 decimal points, and it looks really precise, but if it's not answering what you're after, people are going to do that. So I think you want to think about consulting to collaboration, and collaboration is a partnership between two different types of scientists.
Yeah, I love it, that's great, so it's really a collaboration, it's not a come in and get your shake and your fries and be on your way.
Right.
Any others?
That's really well put. I couldn't say it half as well if I tried, so I agree with what Lance says, but I would say the most rewarding kinds of experiences I've had through some of the cores would be where it really does feel like a collaboration from the beginning. And I think it's, for a statistician, that's fascinating, to hear about your research, what it's about. Many of us are not trained in the medical field, but it's fascinating to us to learn about it and become part of the process. And at the same time, the statistical part of the research is very much part of the science. And so I think when both parties understand that going in and act as collaborators, it can be a great experience.
Thank you. Hey, so this Dr. McCracken and I were statisticians, and so just a couple of things here that I threw up that Courtney has faced herself in statisticians help with IRB protocols. Are they regulatory experts? They're good with numbers, so can't they draft my grant budget for me? And can statisticians take a large data set and find if there's something significant? To that end, I will say, I do remember one of our long time ago, this person's now gone, had this huge Excel file and said, here, what's good in here? And I'm guessing that doesn't work, but please do tell.
Yeah, so I'll start since I sort of drafted some of these things. I think, can we help with your IRB protocol? The answer is yes, right? I think you want us to help with your IRB protocol. Why? Because we're going to help you determine the optimal study design. Should you be doing, a retrospective case control study, a retrospective cohort study? How many patients or subjects are you going to need for your study? And then we want to help you obviously come up with a robust plan to answer your question. So 99% of the time, we definitely want to help with your IRB protocol. Are we regulatory experts? Me, myself, no, I'm not a regulatory expert. I can help you answer some questions based on the experiences that I've had. But when you come to things like, do you think the IRB will mind if I do this, or do we need to do this? I don't know. A lot of times I'll just tell you to call the IRB, right? They're the experts. I can tell you how much to budget for me in your grant, but, when you talk about how much should I reimburse the site for recruiting patients, I don't know the answer to that. But again, I can help point you in the direction of people who can help you. And then can I take a large data set and find if there's something significant? Yes, but we need to come up with a plan. We need to ask a clear research question, and we can help you do that with the data that you have. But we're not, at least I'm not good at fishing. I don't really like fishing. I can't speak for these other people, but I think just coming to us early in the process, as other people have sort of alluded, is the key to success with a lot of these different types of things.
Dr. Moran, that's something to add. Indeed.
I don't know if my mic works. Hello.
Yeah.
I usually can talk loud. I just want to elaborate on the endpoint. So, I say every semester, still academic, somebody comes and they have a data set and they're like, can I answer this question? And I ask them about the design, I ask them how they selected what variables, and I'm like, no, sorry, we can't answer that question. They're like, oh my God. And I'm like, don't worry, bring me data. We can answer a question, but in order to answer the question that you really want to answer, it goes back to design. And how did we design this? What was our primary hypothesis, our primary outcome? And we work and we design the study to answer that. So, you know, if you're caught with retrospective data or other things, then we might not be able to answer the question, but we can provide insight. And do we fish? No, I'm a scientist. I'm a statistical scientist. Science is based on hypotheses. So any question that you sort of bring or data, I'm going to ask, what's your hypothesis? What's in the literature? There's nothing in the literature? Okay, what do you know based on your clinical experience? What have you seen based in your patients? Why do you think this is a question? So it's science because that's the only way we can reproduce, and that's the only way we can scientifically answer this. So I just wanted to add those points. So again, early on, and again, this is science, and we want to be able to replicate what we're doing and be able to tell a clear story of how we got from our question to the answer.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think that directly speaks to premise as well, right, which is a really important part of NIH. It used to be called background in grant applications. Now it's called premise. Can't be too much of a stretch from where you are. So this applies to, we're talking a lot about patients and things like that, but basic scientists is all applies across the board as well. Diana?
Yeah, we cannot help with statistics per se, but we can help with analysis of qualitative data. There are some statistical methods we can throw into that qualitative data, so we can help with that. The main thing that you need to do is, like Courtney said, come to us early. There's specific language for qualitative research that you need to put into that grant, that you need to put into that IRB. And we're the experts on that, so we can help you with writing the qualitative piece to your grant.
Okay, thank you. So we already touched upon this, so I probably won't perseverate anymore, but yes, there is a perfect timing, right? Really, I think early and often is really the message. Does anyone have anything to add to this, or shall we move on?
Another piece I did have just a Venn diagram, there's multiple cores that provide biostatistics, and some of like WinShip is for WinShip, and DAB is the Department of Medicine. All of them have a different home, but there's a lot of the same people involved. So calling up and expecting to talk to someone who can give you the number right away is probably, there's going to be a conversation about what are you trying to do and getting you connected to the right resource and the right people.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that, because I clearly messed it up at the beginning. Yes.
That's really terrific. I'm with the CTSA, and people call me and think I can send you to answer every statistical question. So could you tell me, like, if I'm supposed to send somebody to Stacy or Bob or Bert, is there one key question? Now I've got the qual. Now that's awesome. Now I know if somebody calls me, who's the qual expert. But how do I differentiate? Like, what are some of my first questions to ask people to kind of share it out?
There is no clearinghouse, I don't think.
Well, I think ours is pretty straightforward. Are you working with pediatric patients, or are you a pediatric provider?
Or faculty,
right?
Okay.
And so then you can come to us.
Or you do child health research.
Yeah. I mean, so basically, most people are going to be Department of Pediatrics faculty, or they're going to be working in child health research. So that would be the clearinghouse for me personally.
Yeah, the reason I see it is CMED, is child health, AIDS, Georgia CTSA, so clinical translational, and Department of Medicine has their own as well.
Department of Medicine, I don't understand. How do I know who gives?
Well, they have a primary
They're a-
report,
yeah.
and then faculty, yeah.
They're a faculty member in the Department of Medicine, and that resource is available to them. So a couple of early questions we have to help is, where are they from, who are they working with? And that'll help you point it to I know it's a little confusing from the outside, which is one of the reasons for the panel. But, depending on where you're coming from, there may be dedicated support for your unit, where you may get the CTSA is kind of the most general, and then the Biostatistical Collaboration Core is also very general, but more, and some of them are focused on short-term projects. Some of them would be trying to get someone engaged for a longer term project. So it's really that initial conversation, kind of a triage conversation. You want to know, what is it you're trying to do? What's your deadline? And where are you coming from? So how quickly do we need to get this done? And tell me a little bit about your study.
Thank you. Dr. Hansel?
Yeah, I would agree with everything that's said.
You have to hold it up really close, unfortunately. Is it on?
Yeah,
Okay.
really close? I'm not gonna
Very
miss it, so.
Is that one more?
Yes.
You know this. So, yeah, I would just add that, we do collaborate very closely. I would think for most of you, you would probably start with Courtney, maybe Courtney could reach out to our group here. And the four faculty here in the middle, we all, direct different, core facilities, but we're also all in the same department. And so we often talk amongst ourselves. And just to clarify, for this specific project, where would be the best, home for you in terms of biostatistical support? So sometimes it isn't always obvious, but there is good communication amongst us. But I would think for most of you, the starting place would be Stacy's quantitative research. And then she can reach out to us and we can connect you with the right help that's suitable for your project. Because there are some distinct features for each of our different biostatistics cores. And we could help navigate that for you.
Yeah, and I think that I've witnessed myself the collaboration and the communication amongst this group. There are a number of people in this audience who are not child health researchers, and so you probably wouldn't naturally come to me or to Courtney, but hopefully you're getting a feel that there are people that have been Karen, for better or worse, as the Georgia CTSA representative. You probably are the best thing we have to a clearinghouse, so we're glad you're here today. Okay, so let's talk about prep work and division of responsibility. So, you know, Dr. Waller alluded to the fact that this is not like this one, you know, not a drive-through, right? You're not just going to have a transaction and be done with it. It is a collaboration and it's a relationship. And so I just threw up a couple of questions here to maybe get the conversation started about kind of what's the give and take, what's the division of responsibility, and what are the responsibilities of the investigator, and what in turn can the investigator rely upon and trust that the statistician will accomplish. I'd like to open it up to anyone on the panel that express that. Courtney?
Yeah, I'll just start with what prep work should an investigator do before a meeting. It really depends on kind of what part of the process you're in, but I will say in general, come with a literature review sort of done and maybe summarized. Come with your constraints, right? And so when I say constraints, what do I mean? I mean time constraints, like, is this due hopefully like in 6 to 8 weeks? Is this due in 2 weeks? How long do you have to recruit patients or perform your actual study? And then what is sort of the restraints or constraints with your patient population? For example, I'll come to people will come to me, I'm like, okay, well, you want to see a half a standard deviation difference between your groups, you're going to need roughly 60 to 70 people per group. They're like, oh, well, we only have 50 patients. I'm like, well, then we need to kind of scale back and kind of figure out what we're going to answer with those 50 patients. So I think another thing that people often forget to come with is sort of an idea of how common is your outcome. And most people, I think, in the medical literature are going to be picking binary outcomes or time-dependent outcomes. And so that means the person either has it or doesn't have it. And so, I had somebody come to me the other day and they're like, okay, well, we have 800 patients and 2 people have the event. So that's, obviously going to affect the statistics when you only have 2 people having your event, but sort of knowing that ahead of time, is your prevalence something like 50%, half the population having it, or is it a really small number of people? And the same goes to your sort of exposure. Is it something equal, like males and females, or is it like a rare exposure? So those types of information is going to really help us not only determine the appropriate study design, but the statistical test needed to kind of link, your exposure and your outcome. And so that's kind of what I like to have. And a lot of times too, I tell people, come with me with a statement of what do you hope to add to the literature? And a lot of people actually don't know how to answer that question. They're like, what do you mean add literature? I'm like, well, what's new and novel about what you're trying to do? Are you trying to increase, come out with the largest sample size ever of pediatric patients with X disease? Are you trying to look at a novel association between an exposure and an outcome? And so I really think that helps people think about sort of their research and what they're going to be contributing.
So for qualitative research, I have to agree with everything that Courtney said about coming prepared. one thing that is a little different with qualitative research is the time constraint. We have to have time to transcribe the interviews. We have to have time to sit and read them and do the analysis. There are qualitative packages that help you organize, but it's our mind and our knowledge and our background that helps us to analyze. So that does take a lot more time than a statistical program.
So it really does depend on the nature of the research, sounds like.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's all.
So a great icebreaker for your first meeting is for you to bring a list of aims, a draft of what you want to do, and then if you can bring, the literature review is really helpful, but if you can say, here's 2 papers, I want to write papers like these. They might be about your area, or they might be about a different outcome, but you want to do something similar, because a lot of times that's what motivates you. So-and-so did this, and I want to do the next step. It won't work for every study, but that helps us a lot, because we want to kind of get in the mindset of people who are interested in this medical question.
Yeah, I love that. A lot of times we tell people, who do you want to be when you grow up? And this is
No,
kind of an extension of that. Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah.
Yeah, one very basic thing that comes up sometimes for me is just, I think it's good to think about what population your sample is representative of. You know, think about that before you come in, because I think sometimes, I think it's easy to fall into the trap of sort of, well, I've got these patients, I'm going to collect what I can get, I got them this way and that way, and throw them all together into a spreadsheet or something, and then take it to the statistician. But if you can't describe where what population these patients are representative of, then the conclusions may not be that meaningful. So if you can think about that ahead of time, and maybe also discuss it with the statistician to help.
Yeah, that's really good. And I'm kind of putting together some of the answers that you've given previously. It's a collaboration where you want someone to come prepared, but not with like singular focus. They have to be open to a discussion and the possibilities, but really doing the groundwork and prep work before they meet with you is the gold standard. Yeah. Okay, great. So speaking of sort of what's the beginning, what is a reasonable timeline? What is kind of the end? Is there there's a natural beginning? Is there a natural end to a project? Or do you see these as sort of lifelong collaborations? What are your sense on it? And do you have specific examples of maybe one that you thought went on too long? Of course, no names. Hypothetically.
So I think it obviously depends on the project. 4 to 6 weeks at least. Most projects last longer. Just like the qualitative, you heard there's processing. For us, it's not just pushing a button and getting results. We have to first make sure the data is safe, clean the data. We have to check the model diagnostics. If this don't work, we might try log, we might try this, right? As we said, there's different methodology. We might think this is the best one and then do it and it's not. So there's a lot of back and forth before we even come to the table. I would say, in the DCC, I'm the director of associate director, you're always going to work with a faculty member and then a staff member and a student. We may meet once before you meet you, we may meet 15 times before we meet you. It just depends on the nature and what's going on, but we will always collaborate and update. But it's a really tough question. It depends, but I'd say at least 4 to 6 weeks. You can't turn around anything good. And I don't know about you, but I don't want to put out anything that's not good. So if you want to do something good, it takes time and it takes prep work. And even if you come prepared with these things, and that preparation is really important that Courtney talked about, and because it's a matter of whether before I can even do anything, do we meet 1 time or 4 times, right? And then often still, and even that, I think Stacey said at the beginning, we're here to help quantify what you know and quantify what you don't know. And sometimes at the end of the meeting, I'm like, I'm sorry, I gave you more questions than you gave me, but I look forward to coming back and talking about that.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
Yeah, I do think it depends a little bit on the nature of the relationship and the core that you're working with. With Bird, we tend to target, as part of the Georgia CTSA, so we're closely with Tehran. We tend to target early career researchers and try to help them catalyze their research careers. And so sometimes we'll work with an early career researcher that has submitted a manuscript and they got some comments back and said, you need better statistical analysis. And that could be just a very short relationship, maybe just a few weeks. More often though, we're working with an early career researcher, really helping them refine their specific aims for their very first project. And from that can last a year or two, and that's the most rewarding projects for us, where we see someone who has some very bright person with some really interesting ideas but has never really conducted research before, and to help them reach the stage where they're publishing, where they're starting to win sponsored research projects. That can take a year or two, but that's very rewarding. And then once they're an established researcher, then Bird would no longer be collaborating with them in the future. But we could recommend other statisticians for them to work with in a continued relationship if they want.
Yes, go ahead.
We like it when a core project turns into being written into a grant and a years-long relationship. The other thing to keep in mind is we have so many cores because they're all paid for by different units to be available for the expertise, but the units tend to budget us by exactly how much time they think we're going to need. So we're helping out with your project and your project and your project and your project, and there's some CTSA projects called. So we aren't paid to sit around and lead to action. We don't have a fire pole to the statistics truck, which would be cool if we could do that. But part of the time is to develop the details, and part of it is to balance it. In particular, if you're talking about 4 weeks before an NIH grant deadline, we're probably working on a bunch of other projects too. So keep that in mind. We know it's a busy time of year, so we don't necessarily cut people off for it, but there's usually multiple things going on at once, and so reaching out earlier kind of helps get that initial stuff out of the way. And if you're already in the middle of your project and someone else is just starting, you're going to have a better, end product generally.
Yeah, thank you. It's certainly a theme of today, right? Early. So we did touch upon this a little bit, and I know that you're going to say, what is the cost of doing business with biostatisticians? It depends. Are there any rules of thumb that you can give people, or is it just, it really depends and they need to meet with you and talk about the nuances of the project?
I'll start and then maybe let John and Courtney, others chime in, but I think as far as sort of how to cover the statistician's time, the cores have a certain amount of funding available right there, that's in hand, so that you can come in and you can get help, say, with a grant proposal, defining those aims and writing an analysis plan, power sample size, that kind of thing. And that's usually covered under the cores, whether it's pediatrics, I think, the Center for AIDS Research, the BERT, DAB would be similar. And then as the research expands, and maybe goes further, perhaps you get funded on that project. The good thing there would be to make sure and write in support for a statistician so that when you are funded, you can have a continuing relationship, and we don't have to scramble to figure out how that's going to be covered in terms of covering the time of the statistician. So there are ways of doing this, and part of the discussion that takes place that John and Lance alluded to is sometimes when we need to figure out how to fund further help for an investigator. There are fee-for-service models, and the BCC is an example of that, and sometimes the other cores will adopt a similar sort of fee-for-service structure to continue support. But I think the best way for success is get that initial support through the core, write a great grant proposal. If you get it funded, make sure you've got some statistical help support written in. And we can try to help you find the right statistician to add to that budget, perhaps targeted toward the type of research you're doing, or maybe the specific statistical analysis that you need to do. And if that relationship works, then you're covered moving forward. And sometimes what happens is we get long-term relationships that just become collaborative relationships, and I think probably a lot of people here have had that experience, and it's very rewarding, where you're almost working collaboratively and you're continuing to put the same statistician on the grant proposal as you go forward.
Yeah, and I think there's also like big center grants sometimes that you have your own core as well. So in addition to these cores, there's grant-specific cores, there's subsets of these that are always worth looking into, like our CF group has written a core into one of their recent grant applications. So
I quickly want to just add to that. I think a lot of you guys you're here for K Club, right? So it's career development. I think there's a misconception with career development awards A lot of times you have a biostatistician on your mentoring team, which is an unpaid thing. But you really should also be factoring a biostatistician into the budget of your actual grant. So it may be that you have a PhD biostatistician that's on your mentoring team, but that you put in funding for a master's level statistician. So I think that that's really important because I think sometimes that does get missed, and so I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that, Courtney, and I think that there's, not a whole lot of money, $25,000, but that should be a really important part of that $25,000, yeah.
Also, some of these collaborations will turn into a situation, this doesn't happen with every project, but sometimes you're collecting a new type of data or a design in a different way, so we don't really have standard methods for this. So I've been a statistician on someone's research project, and then I wrote a grant on biostatistical methods, and they were on my project as well. You can have these complementary relationships. That's not every type of study, because a lot of times in clinical medicine, you want to sort of stick to the standard, but some things like bioinformatics or some of these, if you're mining through the data in a new way, we may not know how to do that yet.
Yeah.
And so just combining, doing the best with current methods and then having something on extending that so other people can use this in the future can be a really nice innovation to add.
Boy, that must just be glorious when that happens.
Yeah, it's really nice.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
angels sing.
Yeah.
We all like it. All of us have a balance of our own research and that's funded on those grants and our collaborative research with others. And when those two things go together, it's so much better because we have good motivation for what we're doing. You're getting the work done plus something extra that other people might not have. So it's really a win-win.
Yeah, thank you. Dane, so just something quick to add, move to the next slide then.
Yeah, so, everybody's talked about getting to you early. It's really important to get to us early and put us on the grant because with data analysis for qualitative, it takes time for us to develop the code book, to read the transcripts and analyze them and develop a way that we're going to continue to analyze them. So it's important. I can tell you, we probably have 10 or 15 people who have come to us with qualitative data, don't have the money to pay for analysis, and that data just sits. So it's really important to get to us and get us on that grant.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. So what if somebody doesn't have money and they say, oh, I'm just going to go to Abstat and download it on my computer and I'll do that heat test that Courtney said I could do, right? So are there instances where the do-it-yourself options are acceptable? Do you have any general guidance? I know it depends again, but are there situations where there's so many pitfalls that you should really, it's just not worth it?
So every method tells a story, trying to answer a question. And an example I often give in class is that if your problem you're trying to solve is a screw to make your stair not squeak, you have a variety of options. You can use a wrench, you can use a hammer, you can use all of those can drive a screw into the board, but some of them work really well, and some of them don't.
I like that.
So part of it is a lot of the CAM stuff will have a lot of options, and maybe maybe you've done this a million times and you're really good at it. I think that's totally fine to do it on your own, but most of us took multiple years of graduate study and we've learned how to do things where it doesn't quite work out the usual way. So it's not to say it's required to use the atom bomb to kill a fly, but you might want to just check in and make sure what you're using is good to use.
That's great advice, thank you.
Yeah, I would just add to that, the danger is you don't know what you don't know. So it might seem simple to you, but then maybe, you excluded the 5 patients that were the outliers, and then you decided to add in 3 more hypotheses that you tested, and by the time you're done, maybe, maybe it wasn't an ideal way to analyze the data. So I think it's pretty helpful just to check in with the statistician to make sure. It seems straightforward, but am I missing something here that I hadn't thought of before? There's a lot of times, someone says, oh, I've already analyzed this data, I just need 5 minutes of your time. And then an hour later and 20 questions later, we realize we have to go back to the drawing board a little bit, think about the confounding variables and missing data. And anyway, so it's really hard just to say, give you a green light and say, yeah, that sounds awesome, without knowing a little bit more detail about what's going on in your study and how you approached your data analysis.
It sounds like from your description that most of the board, if not all, have this model that you talked about, Dr. Lyles, where you get this fully subsidized amount of time up front. So why not take your plans to the experts and just vet it ahead of time, is what I'm hearing. Thank you. Okay, are you all ready for this one? Crucial conversation time. So have you ever had, we talk about the collaboration, we talk about don't have the blinders on in terms of being the investigator and thinking you know everything. Have you ever had a crucial conversation with someone and really had to work hard to get them to understand the statistical perspective? And what are some lessons learned that maybe you could share with the group around it? Don't all raise your hands at once. Okay, oh, you're amazing.
I was department chair for 9 years,
Yeah,
so every possible weird thing has happened. I had one crucial email conversation with an investigator who felt that the biostatistician could be included as an author, but they didn't need to get paid. And then they said, well, if I pay them, then they shouldn't be an author. And they were going into the model of running your samples through a lab where someone has specialized equipment. Maybe they don't need to be an author because I've paid them for the service. But I think the authorship, I went over their head, and the authorship rules for most medical journals were pretty clear. If you contribute to this and the paper couldn't happen without you, you should be included as an author. But you have to stand up for the results, so you're responsible for the results as well. So that was, I think, a misunderstanding of the role of a core by a junior investigator. But those aren't easy conversations to have. The other crucial ones are when someone's writing a grant, because I'm going to put you in for 1%. Is that good? 1%? And I'll usually say, well, it's like 20 minutes a week. Is that enough? John, as department chairs, we have to approve grants that go in, and usually anything under 5%, we will call the investigator and say, seriously? In a much more politic way. But you have to think about what you're asking for. And so those are crucial conversations up front: authorship, support on the grant, time, effort, and so on. And in the middle, you may have disagreements. We had a call today where we're not quite clear. One of our study sites is collecting data in a different way. It's a whole lot more work for us, but easier for them. Conversations trying to say, the whole pipeline here is challenging. There's a beginning part, there's an end part. Let's work together to figure out, are we just going to make, your life easier, but ours a lot harder, or vice versa, and try to come up with something that helps on both ends of it. So it's a relationship. Not everything goes smoothly, and you have to figure it out. But if you have a common goal and you're communicating, then I think you can work through these. But it takes time.
Yeah. Yeah. And the other chair, cares to comment on this?
Well, I think most of the time it works pretty well. The times when you have those difficult conversations, I think, run to two different extremes. One is the person that trivializes our inputs to projects like Lancet. Take more than an hour, and I need this tomorrow, and just really trivializing our input and our, the expertise we can bring to the project. Then the other extreme, though, is a little bit more recent that I've been running into, where there's a bright young faculty member in another department or postdoc, and a young scientific researcher who's very bright and who likes computers, and who starts downloading their own software, and then they tell me why I get it wrong and why their approach was right. And, they're very bright, but, a Google search in an hour there, this is probably going to be maybe the world's leading expert. And so what I tell them is,